Hi, everybody. This is Mary Peabody. I'm with the University of Vermont, and welcome and thanks for joining us for this first in our three-part marketing series. We are here today with a lot of folks. We're here with the Vermont New Farmer Program, the Women's Agricultural Network, and the E-Extension Women in Ag Learning Network, and probably a few others have cross-listed this as well. So wherever you're joining us from, welcome, and thanks for being here and spending a little bit of time with us today. We're going to talk, as I said, this is the first of our three-part series, and we're talking about consumer trends because changing demographics and consumer preferences always should be somewhere in your marketing plan. And regardless of whether you're a small farm or a food business or a small-scale entrepreneur, knowing where consumers are headed in their thinking and in their purchasing patterns just makes really good sense. So we're going to take a little bit of time and talk about, what's going on. And as we go, I'll try to point out places where I think you might want to be especially attuned to. You are welcome to provide comments and questions at any time in the chat box. Please do so. I will do my best to keep one eye on that, and Lisa might be able to help me keep an eye on that as well. And whatever we don't pick up during the presentation, I'll try to leave a few minutes for at the end so we can go ahead and take care of that. So before we get started and launching into the numbers and trends, let's spend a minute understanding where this information comes from. By now, you probably all know that in marketing, there are things called trends and there are things called fads. And it's not always easy or even possible to distinguish between the two. But in some instances, it's really clear. For the most part today, I'm going to be talking about trends. Trends are the solid building blocks for future marketing and product development. And trends, the biggest difference between trends and fads, basically, I think, is that trends usually you can see them coming much further out, and they usually have some data attached to them. So there's some rhyme or reason for why it is the case it is. So we're going to be focusing on trends today for the most part. We live in an age of big data. I suspect all of you heard a lot about big data last year, and you will continue to hear about it. Trends are born out of data analysis. The information we're presenting today comes from a broad range of sources. Some comes from the federal government, the U.S. Census, the Economic Research Service, National Ag Statistics Service, Bureau of Labor, and a whole bunch of other federal departments are all charged with collecting data and making it transparent and accessible to people. So a lot of the data does come from there. Other data that we're presenting today comes from the private sector. There are hundreds of organizations that stay alive by monitoring consumer behavior and trends and getting that information into the hands of corporate decision makers so that they have an opportunity to sort of stay ahead of the game. We, as small-scale farmers and small food businesses, are not necessarily on the front edge of driving that research and that data collection, but we're lucky enough to be able to capture some of it in the form of these trends and turn it to our advantage. But surely you've heard of places like the National Retail Grocers Association, which is huge and very powerful, Fancy Food Association, all kinds of private marketing firms and consultants. They all produce annual reports of consumer behavior, and they try really hard to project what consumers are going to be looking for in the coming months and years. There's an interesting relationship between studying preferences and creating the preferences, but that's a topic for another day. So today we're just going to dive into some of these trends. So why should you care? Well, all of it seems a bit far out when you're a small business owner or a farmer living in a small rural community, and probably you're thinking, well, this stuff might be true for city folks, and it might be true in LA, and it might be true in New York City, but I don't think it really relates to me. But the thing is, we live in a world where communication and marketing messages are relentless. 24 hours a day, customers are being exposed to product images, purchase choices, and messages about what they should be eating, drinking, wearing, driving, and how and where they should spend their money. So that does come back to us. That does impact us. Now, I would never recommend, this is my one and only warning, is I would not recommend that any small business owner go out and retool their entire business based on anyone's predictions on trends. So please don't rewrite your whole marketing plan based on what I'm going to say in the next few minutes. But I do recommend that you be aware of the trends, that you consider how they impact your business, and where you might make some small changes and tweaks in your marketing or your product line. And at the very least, I want you to be prepared for what your customers are going to be talking about in the coming season. So let's get started and take a look at some numbers here. And I'll grab a drink and see if I can get this frog out of my throat. Okay, so we're going to start at a very broad macro level, talking about demographics. I know this is probably boring, and some of you are probably rolling your eyes saying, I didn't sign up for graphs and charts, but especially if you're not data geek. But it's important to set the stage for the marketing trends we're going to be talking about later. So stick with me for a few minutes. I promise there's just a few of these slides, and then we'll get into the sexy stuff. So as you can see from this first slide, it has to do with the population demographics in the U.S. The blue side represents males, the red side represents females, and each bar going up represents an age range, which you can see in the center. A couple things we need to be aware of here, and this is not rocket science, and it's not a really big secret, but as a country, we're getting older. Historically, what we were used to seeing in these types of graphs was more of a pyramid shape, where you would have a large percent of your population at the bottom with children and very young people, and then as people age, the numbers get smaller until you have a very small peak at the top of the pyramid where the very old are represented. But that's not necessarily true any longer. Birth rates have declined and more people are living longer. So what we see now is this shape that looks more like a house than a pyramid. For the purposes of our topic today, that has a couple of implications. You see the big bulge at the bottom of the roof line of that house? That's, of course, the baby boomers, of which I am a charter member, and maybe many of you are as well. But follow the walls of the house down, and you see another kind of a bulge where that looks like the walls of the house are bulging out a little bit. That's our millennials. And the U.S. is an aging population, and that has some tremendous implications for consumer behavior. But we also have this little spark, the millennials, that are bringing some balance into the picture. So we'll talk a little bit about millennials and baby boomers, especially next week, or next month rather, when we talk about pricing, but a little bit today, because they're very different audiences, and they're going to have some pretty interesting differences in terms of how we treat them and how we sell product to them. So what are some of the consequences of this aging population? Well, we baby boomers have pretty much owned the marketplace for our entire lifespan, but you recall from the graph that the baby boomers are over 50, so that means a couple things relative to consumer buying habits. First is that their buying patterns are changing. When you get older, you become empty nesters in many cases, and so your housing numbers decline. We're retiring from the workplace, and that will continue to accelerate, or at least we'll be changing, if not actually retiring, we'll be changing what we do for work and how we do it. We're going to be transitioning, not right now, but in the next decade, we're going to be transitioning from peak earning years to fixed incomes, and that's going to see our incomes flatten out and stabilize, which will be new for baby boomers because we've not always been the best, as you know, at living within our means. So millennials and boomers are different, as I said, not just that they're different in life stages, but they are fundamentally different creatures when it comes to purchase decisions. What you've done in your business that attracted baby boomers may not work for millennials and vice versa. So it might be really time to start thinking about sort of who that target customer is and whether your market plan is going to continue to work or whether it needs tweaking or major rewrites. So as I said, you know, the baby boomers' income is going to be stabilizing just as the millennials are going to be reaching out and aspiring to their peak earning levels. But the thing about the millennials is they're not quite as into the whole corporate structure as we've been in the past. And so their peak incomes might not look the same way the baby boomer peak income did. Leisure time is going to be very important to millennials. It's important also to baby boomers, but their leisure time is going to come in the form of retirement. Health is going to, of course, be important for all of us, but the good news is that millennials are more concerned with their health at an earlier age and more intentional about staying active and eating healthy. And again, we talked about family size. For the baby boomers, their sizes are going to start to flatten out and get smaller, which means that their purchasing is probably going to decrease in terms of food that they're buying and quantities of food that they're buying. They may, for a little while longer, still be able to afford more premium products, which is good news. So back to the big picture here. We see this is the population, how the population is distributed around the country. In addition to age, numbers also matter, especially when you're planning a small farm or a food-based business. And here we can see how the population is distributed around the country. I know you probably can't read the key on the bottom, but the dark green are the most populous states, followed by the lighter green. The yellow and whitish states are the lower populations. And so up in the Northeast where I live, you can see it's a pretty low population center. That, of course, has implications for the types of businesses and how and where you sell. If you're direct-to-the-consumer, sales are one of the realities of your life in that excuse me, goodness. If you're selling direct to consumer, then one of the realities is population density. Obviously, the more people that you have in a specific region in your target market zone, the more people you have potentially to buy from you. If you live in a very lightly populated county or region, then you have to work harder. You have to draw that circle around your target market area. It has to be much bigger, or you have to get more of the population that exists there to support you. Of course, some of you might be thinking about selling via the internet, which of course is growing and takes some of those barriers away. But for many of you, where you live is going to determine what you have for market reach and what you're able to do. So that's just sort of another component that we need to be thinking about. So here's how personal income changes within regions of the country. And again, this is the last two quarters, or the second and third quarter of 2015, so relatively recent data. You can see it in the slide, the dark blue and the lighter blue have seen the greatest growth in personal income, and I would note that that is a relative term, that there wasn't a lot of growth in personal income last year. So, but the blue states are where you see some growth, and the beige and the yellowish brown states are where you saw the least amount of growth. And again, that has implications for your business. A lot of those states that you see that are sort of the brown, the darker brown, those are oil-producing states, and you can see that as the price of oil has declined, personal income has declined right around with it. That means people have less disposable income to actually spend on food products. So again, it's not a big thing, but it's something that you certainly want to be aware of as you're planning and as you're thinking about your business. So again, consequences of this uneven distribution, whether we're talking about population or income, it has to do with if you're selling direct to the consumer, if you're reaching out to your customer, you need to sort of know what the demographics of your particular region are, because that will help you decide both price points for your product and even what kinds of products you can sell. It has implications for the scope and scale of your business. I mean, how big are you going to be able to get, and how far are you from a major metropolitan area where you might want to ship your product? Disposable income. Again, a lot of the products that get produced on small-scale farms are luxury, and I'm using that term in the broadest possible sense, but luxury items, and they may cost a little bit more. So if people are feeling pinched for income, that may be one of the areas where they feel like they can economize. If you live in an area that is doing pretty well, and you live in an area like college towns are usually pretty notorious for being pretty robust. They have a high percentage of people that have disposable income as well as higher education levels, and so they're usually willing to spend the extra dollar for local products and services. There's always going to be regional flavors and regional trends that are not reflected in the kind of information that I could provide for you today. You're the best judge of what those regional trends are, and if you see them, or if your Chamber of Commerce advertises them, or if you have marketing people in your region that publish reports or newsletters, I encourage you to take advantage of all of that localized information and use it to your advantage, because trends are not equal across all regions. And finally, just a word about diversity. Racial and ethnic diversity is driving a lot of the food trends that we see in the country. And we see here, this is a diversity index change, and basically the take home is that the darker blue are the counties where that are seeing an increase in their diversity index. And as you can see, it's mostly blue. So diversity, both racial and ethnic diversity, is on the rise in this country. That's good. I mean, that's just something that you want to take into account and be aware of, because it does affect what people buy, when they buy it, and how much they're willing to pay for it. So, okay, I promised you there would only be a few of these slides, and that's it. So now let's get on to the fun and in some cases funny stuff and talk about some trends. So here's some food trends to get us started. And you will be seeing a lot of most of this in the coming year. And I think there's some good news in these trends for farmers and food businesses. I always want to lead with the oatmeal, because oatmeal is going to be huge. And you're going to see oatmeal at pretty much every meal of the day, and you're going to see it in both of it. It's traditional sort of breakfast cereal, but you're also going to start seeing savory oatmeals. You're going to start seeing oatmeal turn up in 2- and 3- and 4-star restaurants. You're going to be seeing it used very much in the same way that we have historically used polenta or quinoa. So just keep an eye out. You're going to see oatmeal. So I don't know how exactly to work that in unless you grow oats, but just an FYI. Good news, grass-fed meats is going to be on the rise still. I mean, that has been sort of coming up in the profile of trends for the last few years, and that is just going to keep on growing. Upscale non-alcoholic beverages, so juices and artisanal sodas are going to be sort of on the rise and creating a larger share of the product market. Good news for everybody is that health continues to be a major focus for people. Again, for the baby boomers, it's about time. We didn't always take the best care of ourselves, and now that we're finally getting into that age where health really, the consequences really start to come home to roost, it's time to start getting serious about it. As I said earlier, the millennials grew up being serious about it, so everybody now is starting to sort of get on the bandwagon of healthful eating and healthful activity. You're going to expect to see more herbs showing up again. This year the herbs are going to be thyme, rosemary, and lavender. And I can honestly say I don't exactly know how or when or why people track this stuff, but they do. And so from me to you, those are the trends, or those are the flavors that you can expect to see emphasized this year. We're also going to see some of these ancient grains like amaranth start to pop up, and I expect that you will probably continue to see a fair amount of quinoa and a lot of the other ancient grains as well. Really good news from my perspective is that there is going to be an intentional emphasis on eating more and wasting less. The amount of food waste in this country is ridiculous, and I think that's finally starting to make its way into the media and get onto the radar screens of more and more consumers. So there's going to be a lot more emphasis on consuming the entire plant. So, for example, one of the things that I've just seen is there's sort of a renewed interest in getting people to eat the greens off of the top of their root vegetables. And I don't mean just beets, because we've always eaten beet greens, but I mean eating carrot greens now, too, and making pesto out of carrot greens. And so you're going to see a lot more of those kinds of things start to appeal. So the way that translates for you is you might see consumers at your farmer's market asking for carrots with the tops on now, as opposed to carrots with the tops off. You're going to start to see vegetables and fruits forward in your restaurants, and especially in the upper class restaurants and upper scale restaurants and fine dining establishments. And all that means is that protein, your steaks and your fish and your seafoods are going to occupy a much smaller place on the plate, and your vegetables and fruits are going to occupy a much larger place on the plate. This is going to be the year of pulse power. This is a UN-determined thing. And pulses are those high-fiber plant proteins like lentils and chickpeas and such like, which we're going to begin seeing a lot more emphasis on those. Again, while we saw an emphasis on grass-fed meats here, we're also seeing that these meats may be taking up less plate space in the future. Fermented foods, kimchi, kombucha, sauerkraut, pickles, all growing in popularity, and no sign of that actually rolling back. People are going to be really interested in seeing what these kinds of, lacto-fermented foods are. And there have been some health claims made as well. So you can look forward to seeing a lot of those. And alternative flours. And again, this is, grains being ground up as flours. This is being fueled largely by the gluten-free craze, but not entirely. There's some health reasons. And Madeline says she's seeing more of these vegetables, and that's good. I mean, Madeline's in Iowa, I'm in Vermont. We're both seeing it, so I think you can pretty much take that to the bank that we're going to be looking at vegetables to take an increasing role. So again, consumer trends continued. Full fat is good. People are starting to turn away from the low-fat and no-fat foods. There's been some recent research that isn't necessarily the most healthful thing that you can do, because very often when they pull fat out, they put sugar in to replace it and to make sure that the flavor still carries. And sugar is going to be this year's demon. Sugar, and partly that's because FDA just released the new healthy food guidelines, and they really cut back on sugar intake recommendations for people. But also, I think that for the last few years, people have been becoming aware that, with the growing obesity epidemic, with the healthcare concerns, people are starting to realize that we've gotten a little carried away with treating ourselves, and that sugar is probably not going to be seen as a great thing this year. But the interesting thing is that there's always, in these trends, there are always sort of these tensions and inherent contradictions that are present. And so while we see that sugar is bad, we also see that this is going to be the year of fried chicken. And I don't know, if any of you watch television a lot or flip through magazines a lot, you may have noticed that Kentucky Fried Chicken has completely revamped their marketing and is really going great guns now and trying to get their market share back up. So you can look to see a whole lot of fried chicken on menus and a whole lot of fried chicken recipes in your grocery store aisles. Emphasis again, another one of these sort of little contradictions is whole foods. I mean, not processed, moving away from the processed side of foods, getting more into, eating closer to the ground, eating, again, as we've heard for years, eating foods that you prepare yourselves, that don't come in a box, shopping the outer side of the grocery aisles. Again, and the trend that is not new but continues in growth is raising the heat level. We've become quite enamored with spices and hot peppers, and every indication is that we'll continue to see those increase, at least in the near future. So what's hot in snacks? Well, this is a good news, bad news thing. The good news is that, snacks are still incredibly popular in the American diet, regardless of whether it's good for our health or not. But I guess the piece of good news, if there's good news in there, is that we're actually switching from high carb to nutrient dense kinds of snacks. So I think there's there's a nod to the healthy in there. Shifting from sweet to savory is going to be a big trend. Again, I said sugar is going to be the demon for the year. So I think we'll be very choosy about what we do. We'll be, as Madeline said, I think that you will begin to see people, treats will go back to, a once a week or a couple time a month event for people. Now, this isn't going to happen overnight. I mean, this is a big, big shift in the American diet because we are very addicted to sugar. But so don't be alarmed if you happen to own a bakery or just started a donut shop. But you will see, even in donut shops, the shift from sweet to savory is starting. It started with bacon, and it's continuing on. So, when you're wondering how and why such a big deal gets made out of these food trends every year, keep in mind that food is a really big business. Over 15,000 new products get launched every single year, each hoping that that they're going to be able to win over consumers and be the next big thing. Of course, only a small fraction of those items are going to survive, but your odds are better if you position yourself slightly on or ahead of the trend curve than if you find yourself behind the curve, which is another reason why it pays to just spend a few minutes a year really trying to position yourself, figuring out what the trends are, figuring out if with a few small tweaks you can make your marketing sort of fit this kind of pitch. For example, if you've never produced kale this year, I'm going to say this might not be the year that you want to make a huge investment in kale because there's indications that kale might actually be on the downslide now. Again, it's not going to be in every market, and it's not going to happen all at once. I'm just saying, if I were starting out today, I'd bet my money on cauliflower, and I'll tell you why in just a few minutes. So, and if you're going to buck the trends, just make sure you have really good data from your consumers, from your customers, that this is something that they really want. And that's why I think one of the advantages always of being a small farm, of being a small-scale local business, is that you have an opportunity to reach out and get in touch with your consumers in an up-close and personal way, which is going to make all the difference, really. So, again, you're going to see, the spicy, sultry, savory thing is really going to continue to grow. You've probably already seen, if you spend any time in co-ops or grocery stores just shopping around, you've probably already seen all the different kinds of hummus that are coming out now, the crazy kind of potato chips that are coming out now. You're going to see some really funky flavored popcorn. Popcorn is still going to be huge, but you're going to start to see some really savory flavored popcorns out there. So for what it's worth, that's where the trends are pointing us. So here we see a list of trend data that basically is telling us what consumers are going to be looking for. There's a few take-home clues for veggie growers and a few crazy things that I put in for fun. But have you been paying, for example, attention to the spiralized veggie craze? Have you seen any of that? If you don't know what I'm talking about, there are these new kitchen gadgets on the market that take vegetables and cut them into these long spirals that look kind of like spaghetti noodles. These machines are selling off the shelves in many markets, and home cooks and bloggers are going crazy on Pinterest and Instagram, posting recipes. And this is being, of course, promoted as a great way to reduce carbs in your diet, very similar to the thinking behind spaghetti squash, if you're familiar with that, is that you replace the pasta with a vegetable. So you don't really give up on the sauces, you're just giving up on the carbs in the noodles and switching to a vegetable-based kind of sauce. But anyway, the take-home message is that your customers may very well be looking for vegetables that are sized for spiralizing, like medium-sized zucchini and yellow squash. So where a few years ago people were all about the baby vegetables, maybe this year it's going to be more about those medium-sized vegetables harvested before they get too seedy, but while they're still of a good enough size so that they fit on these spiralizer machines. Check out the Brussels sprouts in the second column there. Brussels sprouts may very well be the new kale. They are selling out at markets. The three biggest reasons that Brussels sprouts are hot right now, I will tell you, are bacon, balsamic vinegar, and roasting. For some reason, we suffered through with mushy, disgusting Brussels sprouts for years, and then all of a sudden some genius discovered that if you roast them, they get really crispy and sweet. And then another genius decided that if you mix them with bacon, they take on this smoky, wonderful flavor. And then finally somebody discovered that if you pour balsamic vinegar on them, they become this exact sweet, savory kind of delight in your mouth that makes people want to have Brussels sprouts. And that's the kind of food candy that people can feel good about. Again, so it plays right into that healthful thing, but it's a good thing. People are wanting Brussels sprouts now. Cauliflower steaks. I don't know if you've caught on to this yet or not. It's sort of making the rounds of the food magazines and blogs, but it's a good example of what I was talking about earlier when I said meals were becoming vegetable forward. People are taking cauliflower and cutting it into thick slices from the crown down to the core, and then they season it, and then they either broil it or roast it, and they serve it on the plate instead of a steak or a pork chop. And it takes up a lot of plate space. It's delightful. People love it. And cauliflower is becoming a star vegetable. It's flying off the shelves. A lot of markets can't even get cauliflower, and where they can, they're paying in excess of $5 a head for it. So, and another thing is cauliflower rice. And I don't know, if you've heard of this, but this is kind of a brand new trend that's just getting started. And again, it's replacing a pasta or a carb with a vegetable, but basically you take the cauliflower, you put it into a processor with a little bit of water, and then you drain it and dry it really well, season it up and roast it, and you end up with something that looks and feels a lot like rice in your mouth, again, without the carbs. Farro is one of those ancient grains, and it is, it's probably going to be one of the new quinoa. You know, for the last few years, if you're sort of in the foodie know, people have been talking about quinoa because quinoa was a great little, it's actually a seed and it's high in protein. But farro is actually quite good too, and you're going to see more of that. And again, on the sweet savory craze, you're going to see a lot more savory yogurts. There is no indication that the trend on Greek yogurt is going to sunset anytime soon. I think, in fact, it'll continue to grow, and you'll start to see Greek yogurt even replacing sour cream in some of the dips and sauce recipes that we see. And there's going to be some really funky, savory, spicy, hot flavors of yogurt as well. So, you know, it won't be just about the raspberries and the cherries and the blueberries anymore. So macro trends. Some of these trends have been around for so long that I think we probably should just take them off the trend list and just acknowledge that they're part of our food culture. Convenience is one of those. It's not going anywhere as long as we live in the fast-paced society that we live in now, where everyone's working 100 hours a week and kids are engaged in 1,000 different after-school activities and everybody is constantly on the run. We're always going to be looking for fast, easy, and inexpensive. Of course, now we have the added conditions that we also want it to be healthy and to taste great. So convenience isn't going anywhere. Delivery is taking on a bit more of a concentrated edge. We used to think, or at least if you live like in a rural environment like I do, and you finally move to like, you know, the quote-unquote big city, you think of delivery as being able to have pizza or Chinese food delivered to your door. But now companies like Blue Apron and Plated and HelloFresh are starting these dinner-in-a-box companies that are springing up everywhere. And for those that haven't been tracking this, these companies provide you with a list of menus. Then you select from the menus. You figure out how many servings you want, whether you want 2 servings or 4 servings or 6 servings or however big your family is. You give them your credit card number, and they send you a box with all of the ingredients, including all of the spices, all carefully measured out, and printed instructions with pictures on exactly how you prepare this meal. and voila, you become a chef with hardly any effort at all. Your family all of a sudden is like thinking they're eating in a restaurant. Everybody's sort of feeling a little full of themselves because they're able to get on a meal on the table fast, and it actually looks and tastes beautiful. I have a few friends who have subscribed to some of these, and they've had nothing but compliments. They've said the quality of the food is excellent. They have said the instructions are complete, and these are people who can afford to pay, and it's not price point-wise right now. I mean, that may change, but it's not a whole lot higher than it would cost to take that same group of people out to, I would say, a mid-level dining experience. So, it's something that you want to be aware of. I will also say that I think there are some local, quote-unquote, local kinds of companies that are trying to spring up and feature local foods in these boxes. So if you're interested, that's definitely a trend I think you want to keep your eye on. Personalization, not so much where I live, but again, in the major urban areas, personal chef is a growing career option, and a lot of people are graduating from culinary school and becoming personal chefs and making people's dinners and delivering them dinners or delivering them 3 or 4 dinners or coming to their house and cooking a day a week. So people are really into this personalization kind of thing. Again, the clean eating thing comes directly out of the health craze. It's trying to stay away from chemical additives, prepared foods, things like that. Again, starting with whole foods and creating healthful, meaningful menus. I've talked a little bit about pasta. It is probably not a great year to go into the pasta industry in a big way. Even in Italy, they are seeing pasta consumption decline. Not a lot, but 5 to 6%. And if you're in a country that is sort of a pasta-centric country, then that's a big deal. And the United States has been, for the last decade or two, a pasta-centric country. You'll also see a lot of heritage cuisines popping up, and the trends indicate that this year the big ones are going to be Jewish comfort foods and Korean street foods. So for what it's worth and for however that may play out in your world, that's one of the predictions. So, and here's, just for fun, is a list that might have a few nuggets of wisdom for some of you. The column on the left are items where there has been at least a 5% increase in interest over the past year. Likewise, on the other side, you see where there's been a softening of sales. Again, not huge, but enough so that folks are saying just maybe the sun is starting to set on some of this stuff. So on the increase, you see African flavors, authentic ethnic cuisine. Again, we talked about the artisanal soft drinks, people being interested in that, and juices, Middle Eastern flavors. I don't know how many of you have experienced pop-up restaurants, but even here in little old Vermont, we have this phenomena of pop-up restaurants where chefs who don't have a restaurant of their own take over somebody else's restaurant for a night, or a church basement for a night, or pretty much any place that has a commercial kitchen. And for a night or two, sometimes it's a night every week, they sort of have a little restaurant. And there's kind of this little underground network on Facebook and social media of people who know where it's happening. And, so if you're looking to hook up with chefs, that's a trend that might help you out. Other good news for those of us that are interested in small farms and local businesses is hyper-local sourcing. That means not so much sourcing from your state, but really trying to get sourcing from your community, from your town, from your county, really trying to focus in on how local can I get this? Can I get this from my neighbor? Which is a nice trend. I don't know, again, how well it's going to do in the long run, because price and availability and quantity are factors that we have to consider, but we'll certainly see. Ice cream, again, this is where those, I said, sugar's going to be the devil, but again, people will splurge occasionally on really good stuff. And so ice cream is apparently one of those really good things that people are going to be looking for. Now, again, I expect to see some savory ice creams show up. So don't be surprised if your favorite chocolate chip cookie dough is harder to find and something like tomato habanero ice cream becomes front and center in your favorite grocery store shelf. Artisanal butchery, again, I talked about sort of emphasizing waste. There's a lot of waste in the meat industry. A lot of chefs have focused on using the entire animal, which is a really good thing for those that raise animals and know that it's not all about the specialty cuts. So artisan butchery is going to become more and more popular this year. And I already talked about sort of the pickles and the kimchi and sauerkraut, things like that. Non-traditional eggs, I will be honest, I don't exactly know what they mean. I'm guessing that they mean duck eggs, goose eggs, quail eggs, things that are not chicken eggs. But I could be off on a tangent on that one, and I'll do a little bit more research, and if I find out anything different, I'll report next month. Things that the sun is going to be setting a little bit on, again, underutilized fish. I mean, it didn't help that one of the ways they were marketing it was by calling them garbage fish and other things that are completely not appealing to consumers. So we'll probably see a little bit of that going away. I don't honestly know why the fresh beans and peas would be going away, except they're carb heavy, and it may be, again, a reaction to the carb. Kale, we've talked about. You may see a softening of the gluten-free market. I think a lot of the people who jumped onto the gluten-free market did it not because they had celiac disease or because they had any diagnosed reason to give up gluten, but because they thought that it would help them to lose some weight, to be healthier. And what they're finding is that it's a real hassle. You have to work very hard to find gluten-free products. The price point is high because there is high market demand for it. So I think a lot of that, you're going to see some people sort of shifting away from that. Dark greens, I don't really know where that's going. That doesn't really fit with the health trend, but we'll keep an eye on it and see what happens there. Coconut water, we'll probably see a little slackening of. Flatbreads, I don't know about you, but it seems like every restaurant I go to has a flatbread section, and so maybe people are just getting a little tired of it. Again, with the healthful eating and with the new news on the out of the FDA on new guidelines, eggs didn't do so badly this time around. There was a time when, we really all hated on eggs, and that's sort of going away. We're saying eggs now can be our friends. Eggs might be interesting to us. Again, low-calorie entrees may be going away. People are looking again for more whole foods, healthy entrees. They may actually, in fact, be lower calorie, but that's not what's going to be driving the consumer. The consumer is going to be saying, I'd like a cauliflower steak because it's popular, it's trendy, it tastes good, not because it's low calorie, which it also is. Again, alternative sweeteners, you're going to see some more softening, especially of artificial alternative sweeteners, because, the news is not good out there, and the research is indicating that even diet soda is a real hindrance to people's health. And so people are sort of starting to turn away, and if you're in the soda industry, you are probably very nervous right now. And hybrid desserts, again, a little bit goes a long way. If you're going to indulge make it a special treat and make it a sometime thing, not a 3-meal-a-day kind of a thing. Yes, so Madeline asked a really good question. Are the big guys following these trends? Yes, in fact, the big guys are the ones that pay to have the studies done so that they would know how to stock their shelves, and we just follow in on the coattails before they can slam the door in our face. So, yes, they most definitely are going to start to see this, and you will begin to see all of this changing what is available in not only in the grocery stores, but in the food manufacturers. I mean, you've already maybe heard that Campbell Soup and a few other big companies have come out saying they're reducing the number of chemicals and preservatives and food colorings and additives in their foods this year, and that they are really going after that healthy marketplace. So I think that this is going to be something that you are going to see a lot more of. So, all right, well, so what? So this wraps up this month's presentation on trends. I hope you found a few kernels that you can chew on and a couple nuggets of information that will be helpful to you. Again, I would not build my business or even retool my business based on this type of information, but I certainly would be thinking of ways to incorporate a few of these trends into my marketing plan for the coming year. And if nothing else, I might pick one or two of these trends and do a little bit of reading and research so that when my customers approach me with questions, I'll at least know what they're talking about, and that you can have some dialogue with them. I hope you'll be able to join us next month. We're going to be talking about pricing, and we'll revisit a little about what I was talking about earlier, the baby boomers versus the millennials. And in the meantime, I'm happy to take some questions. And I see we've got Megan I heard a rumor about broccoli leaves being the new superfood. Oh, I think that may very well come along with carrot tops and the waste not, want not phenomena. I wouldn't be a bit surprised. I've not heard it, but I don't see, what would be wrong with it? There's no reason why you can't eat broccoli leaves, and it's something that very often ends up in the compost pile or in the trash, which is something that what people are not going to want to do. So I'll keep my eyes and ears open on that one, and thanks for the heads up. Good. I'm very happy that you share this. Please take this information. The recording is going to be available on this site, and you've got my email there, so be in touch. I'm happy to visit with you if you've got specific questions or if you want me to point you in the direction of some research. Again, this is the kind of stuff that it doesn't necessarily play a direct role in how we do our business tomorrow, but only a fool would ignore the fact that consumers are constantly changing and evolving and wanting new and different things. And unfortunately, we live in a world where they have a lot of choices, and they only have to go as far now as their computer keyboard, and they can even dial up dinner. So, please feel free to share far and wide. I think the more information we have, the better able we are to sort of be where we want to be and position our farmers and our local food businesses where we want them, which is right at the forefront of the dining and food business. In the Philippines, awesome. Well, if you need somebody to come and speak, you just let me know, Gigi. So I'm happy to answer questions. I'm trying to read through to see if I've missed anything. Oh, so Sherry's asking, what are some of the savory flavors for Greek yogurt? Well, I've seen some yogurts that are now mixed with grains, so that's one. I've seen some that are mixed with herbs, again, so go back to that, what I was talking about earlier, lavender, rosemary, thyme. I think you're going to see the sun start to set a little bit on basil, because I think, quite frankly, we are pestoed out, but you might see some basil stuff in there. I think you'll start to see sun-dried tomatoes. I'd be really surprised if a yogurt didn't show up with sun-dried tomatoes, and maybe some spice, some sriracha, some hot peppers, things like that. Dill is a great companion for yogurt, so I'd be really surprised if a cucumber dill yogurt didn't show up. Mel was talking about garlic and black pepper yogurt, and mint and parsley. Yep, those are all good ones. I would say the market is out there, and it's waiting to be tapped, and there is a group of people who are sort of over having yogurt for breakfast with fruit. So, I would say be creative. I think lemon is another thing that carries well with yogurt. So, kefir, I have not seen anything about the kefir market, Sherry. I suspect that it has a strong and loyal following, and those people are probably going to stick by it. I don't know if it's going to make the leap over to a mainstream food item, but it might. The emphasis on health and the emphasis on fermented foods may push it over. And yes, Gigi makes an excellent point about food-based colorings being a big trend now. Again, there's a real, people are really tired of having chemicals in their food. They've made a real clear statement, and companies are listening, and so it would be foolish of us not to listen right along with them. Yes, mixing jams. Anne made an excellent point about working with a producer who does fruit jams with various herbs, really different and savory. Tomato jam is taking off, so we had a bumper crop of tomatoes this year, and I have a pantry full of tomatoes jam that I gave away for Christmas gifts this year. I got a few raised eyebrows, but, they'll get over it. They'll catch up. So Dan asked a really good question about how these trends travel. They tend to start on the two coasts, the most urban areas, and they spread inland. And in Vermont, where I am, we are generally about 18 months behind. So, but the thing I tell all my new farmers is I'm like, that just puts you in a really good position. So go to the grocery store, get in the longest line you can find, and start flipping through all those food magazines. And because whatever is in there will be hot here, in about 12 to 18 months. So it's never too late to start figuring it out. It does tend to be driven by those urban markets, though, Dan, and people are kind of because that's where the foodies tend to live, and that's where the trends, the very fashionable restaurants tend to be. And it usually starts with the chefs and the foodies, and then it starts to drift out to the food bloggers, and then it starts to drift out to more main scale kinds of things, and then it begins to infiltrate. So I do not know how far the Midwest lags behind. I would say, to be charitable, I don't think the Midwest is any further behind than Vermont in terms of distance. So I would say, again, about the same, maybe a year to 18 months. And maybe, I think that, in some of your metro areas, maybe you might be ahead of us, and you might be seeing it sooner. But, you might have some time. But it doesn't hurt to be a trend leader either, especially if you're small scale and you can do it in a way that isn't risking your entire bottom line. And Megan agrees as well. I know that I go to Boston and New York City and D.C. and Montreal fairly often, and I'm always keeping an eye out for what's there. I am also very lucky in that we have a culinary school nearby, so I can always sort of pick the brains of, sort of the chefs there who get around a lot more than I do and are a lot more dialed into sort of what's trendy and what's not. Looks like we've got a few people typing, so I'm, again, willing to hang in here and continue. Thank you for your comments and your questions. They were all great. Thanks for hanging in there. And again, if I can help you with any of the materials, the recording is available on our website. I believe the PowerPoint will be as well. Yeah, so trends in cheese and other dairy products. Vermont is a huge dairy state. I think sometimes we must eat our weight in cheese every year, which can't be good for our arteries, but again, it's great cheese. So I don't think we're going to see much of a softening of the cheese market. However, I will throw out a caveat that a lot of that is going to depend on the FDA and federal regulations. And we have been butting heads, a few of our cheesemakers have been butting heads with FDA about aging cheese and how cheese can be aged and whether it has to be from pasteurized milk or it can be made from raw milk. And that's going to be a really big deal in terms of artisanal cheesemakers. And so that story is still being written. And I don't think we know the outcome yet. But I think, again, it's back to we're sort of not wanting, we're wanting full fat, so we don't want necessarily the low-fat or fat-free cheese. We want the real deal. And if that means we have a little bit less of it, then so be it. And again, I think you'll see a strong market for yogurt, especially for the Greek yogurt, which is good for dairy farmers. So. Oh, and yes, thank you, Lisa, so much. You're on the ball. We will be sending out an evaluation, which I hope you'll take a couple minutes to fill out. It won't be very long or very hard, and it will really help us fine-tune some of these for the future and get topics that you're interested in. And I look forward to seeing you next month. We're going to be talking about pricing your products, and then in March we'll wrap up the series on targeting your market dollar. So it's been great fun. My pleasure to spend an hour with you. Take care and have a good month, and I hope I see you next month.